Welcome to another one of my videos. If you are still watching and you're interested in all this medical advice, please do me a favor and smash that like button and hit subscribe. I'm going to be trying to do videos like this once a week if I can do it, if I can manage it with my schedule. And as always, I got to start with my disclaimer. So everything I say here is my opinion. It doesn't represent any institution or hospital, and I can't give anybody any specific medical advice. So use this as a source of information. Keep yourself safe, use the knowledge, and make the best decision for yourself. So I am here in my beautiful break room after a shift and a little bit tired, so bear with me. But what we're going to talk about today is something which I find really interesting and I like to talk about, and that is, what does it mean if you or a loved one is on life support, and what does that actually look like? Okay, so one of the most common questions I get when I was working in the ICU, practicing there, is someone comes in and they see their loved one, in the ICU, all these tubes and wires and everything hooked up and going on, and they're like, oh my God, I wasn't prepared for this. So what I'm trying to do with this is give you a little bit of an idea what to expect if you're in the ICU, and you're sick enough to be in the ICU and on life support, and what exactly that means, and what are these tubes and wires and everything coming out of the person. What are they doing and why are they there? So let's try to break this down a little bit. Remember, a lot of life support has been overblown and talked about in the media, so it can mean a lot of different things. And if someone's in the ICU, remember to talk to and listen to the doctor, because each situation is unique. Everybody has their own level and things that they need. But we're going to talk about some of the basic things and the tools that we use in the ICU when we have somebody that needs extra help, when their body basically isn't able to keep them alive. Okay, so let's talk about that. So the biggest thing that I think about when I think of someone being on life support is actually the ventilator, mechanical ventilation, or the breathing machine, which you might have heard about, right? So the most common thing, the biggest thing we worry about, the primary thing in keeping somebody alive, we think about as doctors, is the airway, right? If you can't get oxygen into your lungs, then nothing else matters. It actually trumps the heart, right? So when we talk about our system and how we go through, we worry about your airway before we even worry about your heart, because the heart can't function without your airway. Now, if your heart stops, that's true, but in order for your heart to function, it needs that oxygen from the lungs, so it needs your lungs to function. So the first thing we worry about in any person coming in is your airway and your lungs, and making sure those are functioning properly before we do anything else. So now, if you're in the emergency department or you're in the ICU and you've gotten so sick that I'm worried that your lungs aren't going to function, they're not going to support the rest of your body, what we're going to do is we're going to put you on a breathing machine, okay? So this is putting you on that mechanical ventilator, which you may have heard so much about. So in order to do this, the first step is trying to make sure your airway is clear and we have good access to your lungs to make sure that that ventilator is going to work, okay? So if that happens, we're going to put in what's called an endotracheal tube. Now, an endotracheal tube is a long piece of plastic. It's curved, and it's designed to go in your airway. So what we do is we actually put it in through your mouth, goes to the back of your throat, into your trachea, underneath the vocal cords. Now, that tube has a balloon on the end of it to help it stay under your vocal cords. So now we have access, it's in your trachea, and we can push air directly into your lungs. So this, like we talked about, is your typical endotracheal tube. Obviously, it's still in the packaging, but this is what we use to intubate you. So this is what goes in. So it basically goes in this way, goes in through your mouth, down into your trachea. Down here is a balloon that inflates. It goes below your vocal cords to allow it to stay in place. And at the top here, this is where we inflate the balloon, and then here is where we connect to the ventilator. Once that tube is in place, we're going to basically use that ventilator. So we hook you up to that breathing machine, which then breathes for you. Now, an interesting tidbit, your lung works by negative pressure. So when you take a deep breath, what's actually happening is your chest is opening up, the muscles in your chest are opening up, expanding those lungs, kind of sucking in, it sucks that air in. The ventilator kind of works the opposite. It's actually pushing air in, trying to open up those lungs. So it works a little bit different than your lungs, which is why it's never quite as good as your actual lungs in breathing on your own. Now, when you're on a mechanical ventilator, if you're on a breathing machine, most of the time you're going to have to be sedated, right? We want to give you medications that are going to make you as comfortable as possible. Now, this changes a little bit. We need to keep you awake enough that you're using your own lungs and your lungs aren't getting too used to the mechanical ventilator so that they stop being functional on their own. So sometimes, and people, you've probably heard people saying that they've been awake while they're on a ventilator. We do that on purpose at times so that your lungs are going to work, so your body can use its normal mechanism to breathe, because we don't want you to become dependent on that breathing machine, because that can lead to other problems like pneumonia or just a weak diaphragm that's not working well on its own. All right, so this is your typical example of a ventilator, right? So we're not going to go in super detail on how these work. We can save that for another video if people are interested. But essentially, this is the tube that connects to that endotracheal tube, goes to the pump here. That's going to be supplying your air. It's going to be pushing in, and then we use this to monitor. Basically, this we can use to control the different settings of the ventilator, how much air we're going to be putting in, how much pressure we're using, and we can also get measurements on your lungs from this as well. Actually, pretty sophisticated and interesting device. Next step is, if you're on a mechanical ventilator, if you're on a breathing machine, you're probably going to be on medications that are helping you survive, whether you're on antibiotics, whether you're on medications to help bring your blood pressure up, medications to help your heart, fluids to keep you healthy and keep you hydrated. So that all needs to go inside of you. Now, there are a couple ways to do that. The most common one you've probably heard of is something called an IV line or an intravenous line. Now, this is a catheter that usually goes into your arm, can go into any vein, and that has access directly into your vein so that we can put medication in there. Those medications go to your heart, and then it's distributed through the rest of your body. Now, in certain instances, those IVs aren't enough to get the medication in. So sometimes a person might need what's called a central line or a central venous catheter. These come in a couple of flavors, the most common of which is actually a big IV. It's big, called 12 French. It's a big long IV that we actually put into the big vessel in your neck, the internal jugular vein, and it goes, basically sits right up outside of your heart so that we can put medications right into your heart so they can get there faster, and usually we can give more in a higher volume. All right, so we've talked about putting on a breathing machine. We've talked about the IV lines that are necessary to give you the medications. So one of the other things that you'll commonly see is a telemetry monitor. So everybody's sort of seen in movies and stuff like that, the stickers on the chest and the little heart rate monitor. So that's real. Obviously in Hollywood, we like to Hollywood it up. I say we, but they at this point, not in Hollywood yet. So we are going to do things. We're going to put you on a monitor. We're going to do different things to try and watch your vital signs, right? So one of the most common things is we put you on telemetry. So that's a couple of leads that go in your heart that actually monitors the electrical activity of your heart. So we can use that to measure the heart rate, and we can use it to evaluate the heart rhythm. One of the other things that we'll look at is we look at the oxygenation or the SpO2 monitor, right? So usually this ends up being a monitor a little stickier. There's a number of different devices, usually which go on your finger or can go on your ear. And what that actually measures is the percentage of your hemoglobin, or the red blood cells, that has oxygen attached to it, right? So this measures how well your red blood cells are being oxygenated, and we can see that on the screen. And so usually we want to keep this above 90%, but again, that varies person to person. Don't freak out about that. The other thing that's usually going to be measured is your blood pressure. So usually there's a cuff on the arm or the leg that's measuring your blood pressure, and this together gives us your vital signs. So I'm going to use this. This is a typical example of a resuscitation room where we'd be initiating a lot of these measures that we talked about putting you on something called life support, right? So this is the bed we'd be having you in, and this is where we'd be, all the staff would be around you, taking care of you if we do have to put you on or do these different measures. So as you can see, the most important thing here is the monitor, right? So this is where we hook you up to all these leads and different measures to get the vital signs so that we can continuously monitor you, checking and seeing how you're doing and making sure everything's okay. So this gives us the most vital information. Obviously, we have a lot of tools here as well. We have suction, we have bag nose masks, we have oxygen, all here to take care of you in the event that anything were to happen. The other thing to talk about are the medications. There are a ton of medications that we use, and without going into each individual one, we can have that discussion about what are the medications we use to keep people alive, but this varies widely, right? Antibiotics, medications to keep your blood pressure up, fluids, medications to regulate your heart rate, blood products. We can give you, there's 4 different variants of those, so that varies widely. There's tons of things that we can do depending on what's wrong with you, so I'm not going to go into that. The only other thing I think is interesting to talk about generally when we talk about life support is how are we going to give you nutrition if you are in a coma, on a breathing machine, and we are doing these things to try to keep you alive, right? So this comes in a couple of flavors. What we prefer to do is we try to feed you the old-fashioned way. And what's that? That's basically through your stomach. So usually what will happen, and this is kind of the most uncomfortable, but what we'll have to do is if you are on a breathing machine and you're in a medically induced coma, what we have to do is we put a tube into your throat that goes down into your stomach. And we can actually give you liquid meals through that, which we regulate. And actually, most hospitals and ICUs have a nutritionist and give you a very specified nutrition plan that goes in through your stomach, into your stomach, and is put into your stomach through your normal digestive tract. Now, if that's not available for one reason or another, if you're having problems with your stomach, we do have the ability to give you nutrition through. So when we're giving you nutrition through your IV, we call this total parenteral nutrition. So what that means is there's enteral and parenteral nutrition. Enteral basically just means it's using your own system, your enteric digestive system, the one on the inside, to feed you. Parenteral means it's basically going through the periphery or through your IV. So we can give you nutrition this way, but there are some things that make it a little bit difficult. That kind of nutrition can actually cause some problems. It can increase your likelihood of infection, and it can cause problems with your liver and your pancreas because your body's not getting nutrition the normal way. And obviously the nutrition isn't going to be as high quality as if it was done through your gut. The other problem is if your stomach and your gut isn't being stimulated the old-fashioned way, sometimes it can turn itself off, which is never a good thing. So last but not least, to remember, if you're on what we call life support, most of the time you're going to be on sedating medications. We mentioned that a little bit, but this usually means a variety of medications to help you forget that it's happening, keep you comfortable, and keep you calm. Because most people, if they wake up and find there's a tube in the back of their throat and they've all these things attached to them, are not going to be calm. So usually we have to give you stuff to help calm you down so that when we're ready to take that tube out, you're going to be calm enough and let us do it. Okay, guys, I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned something. I hope this was interesting. I hope if you are ever in the situation where you or a loved one ends up being in the ICU and has to be on this, I hope you do well. And I hope this helps you wrap your head around it and approach it with a little bit more knowledge and education.